over the course of, since the war in Ukraine started, uh, I certainly have come very, very much to the conclusion that a lot, and I mean a lot of people on the left, when it comes to foreign policy, don't really understand what they're talking about, or just take the idea that whatever America does, regardless of whatever even America does, if America was to give like someone a gift internationally, then the left would somehow assume that this gift is some sort of mysterious magical Trojan horse that is about to break forth, and all these US Marines about to just pour forth from this gift and just coup the country and take it over and change the government. This is this is unfortunately the view of a lot of people on the left. And one of the big things we saw back right at the start, which is part of the why I want to go over this article in The Guardian, because I think this is really disingenuous. Right back at the start of the Ukraine war, a lot of people on the left were going, "Oh my God, it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's like the Cuban Missile Crisis. We just need to sit down and negotiate, and it'll all be good." This is not the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russia invaded Ukraine. The Cuban Missile Crisis was essentially the Soviet Union wanting to put nuclear weapons into Cuba so it could strike America quicker in the event of a potential nuclear war. And America went, "No, we're not having that." And of course, things and tensions built. Now, of course, eventually there was negotiations that happened about this. We aren't talking about an ongoing war in that region. That was not the case. What we are talking about here is Russia has invaded Ukraine from the point of Vladimir Putin, basically so he could get some more territory. He's doing it old school imperial style. And unfortunately, the arguments in this Guardian article, I really disagree with. I really disagree with that are being put forward by here. Who's the guy? Jonathan Steele is sort of advancing these arguments. I really disagree with them. I think this is a really bad take on the situation in and around Ukraine. It has absolutely no parallels whatsoever to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and yeah, this is just so wrong. But here we go. Diving into, like I say, we'll get to some of these arguments that he makes and sort of a rebuttal against them. So before we go diving into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, as we said, like I say, this article was in The Guardian. It's been written by a guy called Jonathan Steele. The title of 60 years ago, true statescraft avoided a nuclear war. We need that again over Ukraine. So he is once again worried by the fact, oh my God, there's going to be a nuclear war. Who are the ones threatening to use nuclear weapons? It's been Russia. No one in the West has said, if you don't back down, Russia, we're going to use nuclear weapons on you. No. The worry is that Putin is going to get so desperate because his army is failing in such a spectacular way that he is going to use a nuclear weapon to try and avoid a defeat. That is the genuine worry here. And it's not the West putting pressure on him to do that. It is his own forces' failings and him potentially becoming desperate that he has to do that. That is the worry. So anyway, let's get into this properly then. So, anyone who hoped that Vladimir Putin would declare victory in Ukraine and withdraw his failing troops must now admit that no such outcome is realistic. First of all, how can Putin really claim victory in this scenario? He is very, very clearly losing, and now he has annexed those territories illegally, by the way. Why should Putin get those territories? That's still something he's going to advance in this argument that I don't think he really should get to make a claim on. That, like I say, we'll get to that argument later. That I think is really, really stupid. But him pulling back and being defeated, that is realistic. Now, it may take a bit longer time than we would like. That's true. But unfortunately, we've got to settle into this because it is Putin who was the initiator here. And from what some of this argument he will be advancing, this is very much appeasement attitudes, and we should not be appeasing Putin in this regard. So, anyway, back to it. In a revealing quote during a meeting last week with about 100 academics from 40 different countries, Putin rejected it. Fyodor Lyko, I think that's how you say it, a highly respected think tank editor who was the meeting's moderator, had the courage to ask the Russian president if he would retreat like the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev did in the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Certainly not, Putin replied. To the general laughter, according to the Kremlin transcript, he went on to say, "I cannot imagine myself in a role of Khrushchev, no way." Well, he may not have a choice. His armies are being picked apart left, right, and center in Ukraine, and he's becoming desperate that he's had to call up hundreds of thousands of conscripts basically to put as many bodies as he can to try and stem what is essentially this failing tide. There have been videos coming out recently of Russian soldiers mutinying because they have not been given, or the families at least, have not been given the promised money that they were promised when they signed up under this conscript agreement. But anyway, it continues. The amusement was probably prompted not just by the physical and attitudinal contrast between Putin and the cold disciplinarian and the fitness freak and Khrushchev, the pot-bellied and jovial reformer who ruled Russia erratically very much after Stalin's death. Everyone remembered how Khrushchev was dumped out of power by his colleagues 2 years after the Cuban adventure. Well, we can hope that at least one case that might be, hopefully, somewhat of a similarity. But back to it. Putin's comments leave us facing the bleakest of scenarios. We now have no prospect of unilateral Russian retreat. Well, what about a Russian defeat? How about just pushing Russia out of the country that they are invading? Because really recently, all those massive Ukrainian advances have shown that, yes, the Ukrainians can beat them. But anyway, back to it. It comes on top of the grim reality that there is no basis for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine since Putin made the stupid mistake in September of annexing 4 Ukrainian provinces, thereby undermining any chance of mutual concessions. Why should there be mutual concessions? Russia invaded Ukraine. Why should Ukraine be forced to make a concession to an invader? Yeah, you see why I said at the beginning that this is a lot of very, very much appeasement attitudes about this. And yeah, he made that because that was his intention all along, to annex those territories. Thereby under any chance of mutual concessions and an agreed pullback, since the Russian parliament now considers the regions part of Russia. As the fighting intensified, both sides increased their demands and hardened their positions. The demands from Ukraine were, we do not want to be occupied by Russia. That's not an increase in demands here. That's not an increase in demands. I think anyone whose country might be invaded might go, yeah, we don't want to be invaded by you, so can you just, go away, please? I think that's pretty much a reasonable request given this scenario. Now, back in March, a month after the Russian invasion, a deal was possible. Putin had, quote, recognized his dispatch of troops to occupy Kiev and effect regime change had failed on the battlefield. Results suggested that Putin mainly wanted Ukraine to renounce its ambition to join NATO and accept the autonomy of Donetsk and Luhansk. First of all, why should Ukraine renounce its ambitions to join NATO, even given the fact that if this was the March scenario and that obviously the advance to Kiev failed, if anything, Ukraine probably wants to join NATO even more to make sure that and this invasion does not happen again. That is the right, to be honest, of the Ukrainian people to be safe and secure. They do not want to be invaded. So to them, they have every reason and every desire to join NATO. And then you've got the whole thing of trying to accept more autonomy for Donetsk and Luhansk. We've seen that those leaders of those two areas were Russian puppets anyway. They were going to just go, well, we're going to do a referendum to join Russia. Oh, look, it's 90%. That's what they intended to do anyway, to have enough autonomy to just go, well, we're not part of Ukraine anymore. We've had this referendum. Whoops, we're part of Russia now. And then what's to stop Putin from doing this to other places? Because this entire area in Donetsk and Luhansk is being concocted and pushed by the Kremlin to essentially annex those areas. No mention of that at all in this article, but there you go. Of course, accept more autonomy for instance, in line with the Minsk agreements back in 2015. Once again, who broke those Minsk agreements? It was Russia, not Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was willing to consider Russian demands in exchange for a ceasefire and a Russian withdrawal, while the status of Crimea was left for later discussion. Except when those discussions took place, because again, he's mysteriously not mentioning this in this article, there were negotiations taking place. But essentially, if you may remember, we reported back on this at the time, Russia was sending their equivalent of Nadine Dorris to negotiate. That's how serious Russia was taking these negotiations. They were sending their equivalent of Nadine Dorris. Do you think Putin was taking these negotiations seriously? No, he was trying to buy time. And as a result, this now has to be settled on the battlefield. I'm sorry. And I know people may want to see a diplomatic situation to this. I think a diplomatic situation and an approval to this would be good. I personally would like that as well. The problem is Russia gets nothing. Russia gets nothing. The acceptable terms is status quo. That Russia sods off and Putin's troops back to Russia, and Ukraine gets its territory back. End of story. That should be it. That is what they should be offered on the table. And unfortunately, now this has to be settled on the battlefield. I don't see any other way this ending. And this is because of Putin, not on the West. It's on Putin. So back to it. That did not happen. Enter Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. Their interventions and the sense that what had been a war to defend and restore Ukraine's sovereignty had become a proxy war between the West and Russia. Oh no! Oh no! I'm sorry, but this is a war to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty. And the fact that you've got Joe Biden and Boris Johnson supplying Ukraine with weapons that are essentially allowing Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty and very successfully fight back against Russia on the battlefield. Yeah, I've got no problems with that. We should be sending them more weapons, as far as I'm concerned, because then this war might be over a lot quicker. And at the back of this all lurks a nuclear mushroom cloud. Again, who is making those threats, who has made those threats? It has been Putin. Not since 1962 has the world been in such danger. Again, here comes the claim that, oh, it's like, it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's like the Cuban Missile Crisis. No, this has virtually no parallels to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm sorry, but it does not. The crisis of October 1962 was worse than today's confrontation in one key respect. The working assumption was that any use of force by the US President John F. Kennedy to stop the Soviet ships carrying nuclear-tipped missiles to Cuba would quickly escalate into a launch of nuclear weapons at America and Soviet cities. Both superpowers put their arsenals on high alert, and the world faced an existential threat of global suicide. In today's crisis talks, and again, Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. Russia has nuclear weapons, and Russia is threatening to use nuclear weapons on the battlefield because it is that desperate. It is losing that badly. It is very likely we will be seeing Ukraine recapture Kherson down in the south very soon. Russia is losing. They're the ones getting desperate, and is Putin trying to roll out this nuclear deterrent, this nuclear weapon rhetoric to basically try and say, because I've got nuclear weapons, I get these pieces of Ukraine. That is not how international negotiations and diplomacy should be carried out by use of threat. The nuclear crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, was done through negotiations. And yes, there was a bit of, threatening, but it was done by high-level talks that was sorted out. Once again, there was no war or ongoing war conflict situation in the Cuban Missile Crisis. These two are not comparable. In today's crisis, the talk of using the so-called tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical is an elastic concept, of course, and today's US nuclear bombs, like the B-61s that Biden is sending to the US bases in Berlin, are 30 times more powerful than the ones dropped on Hiroshima. It's not the US threatening to use tactical nukes. It is Russia threatening to use those tactical nuclear weapons. So why are you mentioning the US? The Pentagon released the unclassified selections of its now long-delayed nuclear posture review just last week, and they showed the effects by arms control experts to persuade Biden administration to support the no first use have failed. The US will not abandon its long-standing readiness to escalate to a nuclear level and respond with nuclear weapons to a non-nuclear conventional attack. Russian doctrine is depressingly similar, and Putin has said that he will use whatever weapon is necessary if needed. The Russian territory comes under attack. Well, it's already under attack, technically. Hasn't used them yet. Biden has shown some restraint. He has resisted Ukrainian requests for long-range rockets that could hit Russian cities and provoke an all-out war between Russia and NATO forces. Not, again, a full guarantee that Russia would be stupid enough to attack NATO forces or, make a strike against, NATO targets. I've got no problems with giving. I think Ukrainians should have longer range missiles so that they can strike deeper into Russian territory and take out key Russian military infrastructure. He has turned down Zelensky's call for NATO to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I'm fine with that, to be honest, because that would potentially lead to a war. But there you go. He has not sent US troops to Ukraine and made no other NATO countries send troops either. Again, there's very little even recognition of actual what the Ukrainians actually think about this, and like what the Ukrainian position of this, and it's just typical what it always goes back to. There is almost no recognition of this is what the Ukrainian people want, or this is what they would like to happen. It's every single time we cover one of these people, it's the exact same thing. It's America, 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 but what about Ukraine? What about what they want and their safety guarantees? So, anyway, just jumping on ahead. First of all, these is the absence of any negotiating forum or an agenda for mutual concessions. Again, why should there be mutual concessions when Russia has annexed 4 territories of Ukrainian territory? Why should Ukraine make concessions to Russia at this point, who is the invading power? That is, I'm sorry, that is, giving in to Putin. And if he does it now, well, what's to stop him in the future doing this again? Both sides want military victory and are lured by the mirage that it is obtainable. What do you mean? Have you seen how well Ukraine has been doing? It's entirely obtainable for Ukraine to push them out of Russia, to push them out of Ukraine and back into Russia. It is entirely possible for them. They have shown that this summer, that it is entirely possible for them. They're about to retake Kherson. There is not even a basis for a ceasefire, because Putin would actually have to pull back his troops in order to actually generally obtain that ceasefire. And throughout all this, there has meant to be a ceasefire, which Russia has meant to be certainly enforcing in those occupied regions, but it has not. And we have been seeing since those regions and that civil war initially started to continuously break the ceasefire. And that's why Ukraine wanted to control those borders next to Russia, because where are all these weapons coming from? They had to be coming from somewhere, and they had to be coming from Russia. Again, there's just no recognition of like what's really going on in Ukraine. This is so annoying when you see stuff like this. But anyway, yeah, you get the idea. I'm sorry, the guy who wrote this, Jonathan Steele. I think this is completely foolish. I think this is giving into appeasement language. There is no real correlation between the situation going on currently in Ukraine and the one going on in the Cuban Missile Crisis. I know a lot of people are desperate to try and make that comparison because of, well, lefty brain rot and basically America bad. But no, in this case, America good for supplying weapons to Ukraine, which have allowed them to not only retake territory, but successfully fight back against an invader. So I'm sorry, but this article, nothing more than appeasement language. I'm sorry, straight up, it absolutely is. But you know, what more can you do? I've said it once, I'll say it because I said at the beginning, there's a lot of people on the left who are really, really bad when it comes to takes on international politics. And this article is certainly proof of it. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.